The box I was carrying that morning weighed 22 pounds. I know because Benny weighed it afterward, after everything, the way you check a thing once you've learned that small details have a way of mattering more than you planned. 22 pounds. Nothing. By the standards of a man who spent 34 years installing heating and cooling systems in commercial buildings across East Tennessee. I had hauled compressors heavier than my own body weight up rooftop access panels in July heat. But at 6:40 in the morning on a Tuesday in February, standing in the supply aisle of the hardware store where I'd been working since my retirement account ran dry, 22 pounds was the weight that put me on the floor. I didn't fall dramatically. No crack of thunder, no slow motion spin. My legs just disagreed with the rest of me, and the next thing I knew I was sitting on cold linoleum, with the box beside me, and Benny Prudhomme's face above mine, his cap pushed back on his head, and his expression doing the careful thing faces do when a man is frightened and doesn't want to show it. Benny was 61 years old and had worked the next aisle over from me for the past 2 years after his roofing company folded. He was not a man who panicked. He had buried a wife, raised 2 daughters alone, and once reset a dislocated shoulder by himself in a parking lot, because the nearest urgent care was 40 minutes away. His hands were the steadiest I'd ever seen on a person outside of an operating room. He crouched beside me and put 2 fingers against my wrist and said, "I'm calling it in." I told him not to. "Just got dizzy," I said. "Help me up." My left arm disagreed. There was something moving through it that didn't belong there, a heaviness running from my shoulder to my elbow, and my chest felt like someone had set a second box on top of it. I stopped arguing with Benny and let him make the call. The paramedics came in 11 minutes. Benny walked alongside the stretcher to the ambulance and gave them my age, my medications, and the fact that I hadn't eaten since the previous evening and had been on my feet since 5 in the morning, because Benny paid attention to things without being asked. He wasn't my family. He was the man who shared his daughter's banana bread whenever she sent one down from Asheville. But he came with me to the hospital and sat in the plastic chair by the window and refused to leave, because that was the kind of man Benny Prudhomme was. At the hospital, a nurse named Corinne asked me for an emergency contact. I gave her my daughter's number without hesitating, because that was still a reflex. Tessa was 41 years old and lived 20 minutes away in a house with heated bathroom floors and a kitchen I'd never been invited to cook in. Corinne stepped out. When she came back, her expression was arranged into the professional neutral of someone who has spent a career delivering information without editorializing. "Your daughter says she'll be in touch," she told me. "She'll be in touch." 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the bedside tray. I opened it. "Dad, hope you're feeling better. Lance and I have the Dearborns tonight. Let me know what the doctor says." I set the phone face down on the blanket. Benny was looking out the window at the parking deck below, giving me the privacy of not being watched, which was the most decent thing a person could do in a room that small. I was 67 years old and I had not cried since the afternoon they lowered Irene into the ground, and I was not going to cry in a hospital room over a text message from my daughter. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and looked at the ceiling and waited until the feeling passed, and Benny kept looking out the window, and neither of us said a word about it. I need you to understand something about the man I was before all of this. Not to excuse anything or explain it away, but because you cannot understand what was taken unless you understand what was there. I married Irene Forsyth in the summer of 1982 in a church in Maryville, Tennessee, with 83 people in the pews and her father in the front row, wearing the expression of a man trying to decide whether to be proud or terrified. He chose proud. He was a quiet man. A retired county assessor who had spent 30 years measuring property values across Blount County, and who had the particular carefulness of a person who understood that the difference between a good decision and a bad one often came down to a single overlooked number. He liked me, eventually. He told me once, over the only 2 glasses of bourbon I ever watched him finish, that I was the kind of man who showed up. He meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. I tried to make it true every morning for the next 38 years. We bought our house on Tillman Road in 1991, a 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre lot with a covered porch that faced west so you could watch the sun go down over the ridge without getting up from your chair. We paid $114,000 for it and spent 6 years flinching at the number. Irene planted an herb garden along the back fence the first spring, rosemary and thyme, and something she called lemon balm that I could never correctly identify by smell alone, which she found unreasonably funny every single time I tried. She would hold a sprig under my nose and ask what it was, and I would say something wrong on purpose just to hear her laugh, and her laugh started in her shoulders before it reached her face, and I would give a considerable amount to hear it one more time. Tessa grew up in that house, learned to ride a bike in the driveway, broke her collarbone falling out of the backyard oak when she was 8, and I drove her to the ER with one hand and called Irene with the other, and the whole way Tessa kept saying, "I'm fine, Daddy, I'm fine," her face the color of typing paper. She left for college in 2000, and the house went quiet in the way houses go quiet when the person who made most of the noise has packed up and driven away. And Irene and I stood on the porch watching her car disappear around the bend. And after a moment, Irene said, "Well, guess it's just us now." She said it like a woman who considered that a gift rather than a loss. I felt exactly the same way. Irene got sick in 2014, not the smallest manageable kind. The other kind, the kind with oncologists and hospital parking garages and conversations in the car, because we couldn't have them inside where Tessa or the neighbors might hear. She fought it for 2 years with the same stubbornness that had won every thermostat argument for 3 decades, which I had always privately considered one of her finest qualities. She died in March of 2016. She was 61. I was 63. There is no arithmetic that makes that add up right, and I stopped trying. The night of the funeral, after everyone had left and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I never touched, I made myself a promise. I said it out loud, quietly, to the room, to the herb garden I could barely see through the dark window. "This house stays," I said. "Whatever I have to do, however many years I have to stretch a retirement check that wasn't built to stretch, this house stays, because she is in every wall of it, and our daughter grew up in these rooms and some things you do not sell." I kept that promise for 4 years. Then my daughter called me on a Thursday afternoon in October, with warmth in her voice I hadn't heard in longer than I could track, and said she'd been thinking about me out there alone, and that she and Lance had been talking, and maybe it was time to look at some options. I should have noticed the pivot. From "I've been thinking about you" to "maybe it's time to look at options" happened in under 20 seconds. But Tessa was calling me, and she sounded like the girl who used to fall asleep in the truck on long drives and wake up surprised every time we pulled into the driveway, and I wasn't careful. I said yes before she finished explaining what I was saying yes to. The plan, as she described it, was simple. The house needed a new roof. She wasn't wrong. I'd been putting it off for 2 years, and the HVAC units were original to the build, which was my professional embarrassment as much as my practical problem. She'd found a contractor. 6 to 8 weeks. I'd stay in their guest suite while the work was done, which had its own bathroom and a view of the backyard. Lance, she added, was really looking forward to it. I didn't entirely believe that, but Tessa sounded like she meant it, and I'd been eating dinner alone for 4 years, and meaning it was enough. I packed 2 bags on a Saturday morning in November, watered the herb garden. It had gone mostly to rosemary by then, the one plant that survived without tending, checked the back door locks twice, and left my house key on the hook by the front door for the contractor. I waved to Marlene Hoyt across the street as I loaded the truck. Marlene was 74 and had lived on Tillman Road since before I bought the place, and she had the watchful, unhurried attention of a woman who had seen enough of life to know when something deserved a second look. She waved back. She was still on her porch when I turned out of the cul-de-sac. What happened after I drove away, Marlene told me months later. At 9:15 that same morning, a silver SUV with a magnetic real estate sign on the door pulled up to my house. A woman in a blazer let herself in with a key. 2 men followed with a measuring tape. They were inside for 47 minutes. Marlene noted the time, took photographs on her phone, and tried to call me that afternoon. The number she had for me rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that was not my voice. She tried twice more that week. She never reached me. I didn't know that my carrier had transferred my number to a SIM under Tessa's account the Tuesday before I moved. She had called claiming to upgrade my plan. The process took 8 minutes. Every incoming call from outside her approved contact list went to a temporary voicemail I couldn't access. I wouldn't know any of this for 5 more months. Lance and Tessa's guest suite was large and quiet and had nothing of mine in it. I put Irene's photograph on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed listening to the sound of a place where nothing belongs to you. Lance came in once to show me where the towels were. He was 44 and worked in commercial real estate development and had the particular quality of men who have never needed to worry very hard about money. A looseness in the jaw, an unhurried relationship with eye contact. He shook my hand instead of embracing me and told me to make myself at home with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how temporary that offer was. The contractor never appeared. By December, Tessa was saying the roofing company had supply chain issues. By January, a permitting delay. By February, the original inspection had uncovered something structural, and these things take time, and she didn't want me worrying about it. "I want you to focus on taking care of yourself," she said. And she said it with exactly enough warmth to make me feel cared for, and exactly enough distance to make me feel I was supposed to be grateful. I picked up the hardware store job in December because when I finally looked at my bank statements properly, the looking hadn't gone well. Automatic withdrawals I didn't recognize, small, irregular, from accounts that listed my name as cosigner. I called the bank and sat on hold for 18 minutes. The representative I spoke to walked me through 11 transactions. I had co-signed on 4 personal loans over the previous 2 years. The primary borrower on each was listed as Tessa Ormond. The total drawn against my accounts was a little over $19,000, pulled in amounts too small to trigger the alerts Irene had set up years ago and that I'd never thought to recalibrate after she was gone. I added that to the $62,000 I had given Tessa in 2019, when she said the boutique she and a friend were opening just needed a bridge, just 6 months. She'd have it back to me by the following spring. 27 months had passed since that deadline. I hadn't brought it up. Bringing it up meant keeping score. Keeping score meant admitting that our relationship had become the kind of thing that required it. I wasn't ready for that, so I managed it the way you manage a bad knee, carefully, without looking at it directly. I got up at 5 every morning and drove to the store and stocked shelves and helped customers find the right gauge for deck screws. And I drove back to Lance and Tessa's guest suite and made whatever I could put together in their kitchen before they woke up. And I told myself it was temporary and that the house was waiting and that my daughter was handling it. And then the morning came when 22 pounds was too much and Benny was calling it in. And I was looking up at fluorescent lights, wondering how I got here. The hospital room door opened at 2:15. I expected Corinne. I expected the cardiologist I'd met that morning. Some part of me, and I'll say it plainly, because pretending otherwise costs more than the admission, still expected Tessa. Still expected that 2 hours was enough time for a daughter to rearrange whatever the Dearborns required and drive 20 minutes to sit beside her father. The woman who walked through the door was not Tessa. She was in her late 50s, small and straight-backed, with Irene's posture and Irene's way of pausing in a doorway to locate everyone in the room before she moved. She had Irene's eyes, gray-blue, set wide, with the particular calmness of someone who has survived something and chosen not to be diminished by it. I had not seen those eyes since my wife's funeral 6 years ago, and the sight of them hit me somewhere below the sternum, with a force I was not prepared for. "Phyllis," I said. Her name came out rough. She crossed the room and sat in the chair Benny had vacated and folded her hands in her lap and looked at me steadily. "I've been trying to reach you for 4 months," she said. "Every number I had was wrong. It took a neighbor of yours, Marlene Hoyt, tracking me down through the county assessor's office using a property record to finally get a message through." She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the blanket across my legs. "Before Irene died," she said, "she set up a trust. A revocable living trust to hold certain assets and name you as the sole beneficiary. She didn't tell you because you were working around the clock to cover her treatment costs, and she didn't want to add one more weight to what you were carrying. She asked me to serve as trustee guardian, to oversee it and make sure it transferred to you cleanly when the time came." "What assets?" I said. "Her father's commercial property on Willow Pike, 3 small rental units he left her in his will, a managed investment account she'd been quietly contributing to since the 90s, and a land parcel." Phyllis paused. "A 3.4-acre parcel on the eastern edge of Knox County. Her father acquired it in 1989. At the time it was nothing, scrubland next to a creek drainage. But 3 years ago, the county approved a transportation corridor expansion that runs directly along the northern edge of that parcel. 2 developers have been circling it ever since, because the road access it provides is the only viable entry point for any large-scale project in that zone." I waited. "The parcel's assessed value is $1.2 million, Phyllis said. "Its actual market value, given the access rights issue, is considerably higher. I have been told by 2 real estate attorneys that a motivated buyer would pay close to $3 million for it." The cardiac monitor kept its rhythm. It did not know what had just been said. It just kept counting. "She never told me," I said. "She told Tessa." Phyllis's voice held steady at the edges. 2 weeks after the diagnosis, when she was trying to put things in order, she told Tessa about the trust, explained that you were the beneficiary, and asked Tessa to help manage communications with the attorney because she didn't want to burden you. Phyllis stopped. That was the only mistake she made. I pressed my palm flat against the blanket. Irene had been 3 weeks into a terminal diagnosis, managing my feelings and our daughter's logistics simultaneously, and she had trusted Tessa to carry a piece of that weight. I knew the exact quality of that trust. It was the same trust I had been operating on for 40 years. Tessa didn't interfere with the trust directly. I hold the controlling documents and she has no authority over them. But she has spent the past 18 months working through her husband. Lance Orman's development firm has been trying to acquire access rights to that land parcel for a construction project on the adjacent property. He has known since before they approached the project that the land was in a trust belonging to you. Everything he has done, including convincing Tessa to remove you from your home, has been designed to keep you uninformed while he found another way to get what he needed. And the house, I said. Phyllis reached into the folder. Your daughter holds a durable financial power of attorney you signed during a brief hospitalization in 2018. She used it to authorize the sale of your home on Tillman Road to an LLC registered in Delaware. The sale closed 6 weeks after you moved into her guest suite. She received the proceeds. The current title holder is an entity called Blue Ridge Holdings, which I have reason to believe is controlled through a subsidiary of Lance's firm. I sat with that, the covered porch, the herb garden, the key I had left on the hook by the front door for a contractor who was never coming. There is one more thing, Phyllis said. She reached into her bag a final time and produced a plain white envelope. My name on the front. The handwriting was Irene's, the capital L, with the slight backward curve she'd had since grade school. It's the same curve I'd spent 38 years watching move across grocery lists and birthday cards and library books she never returned on time. She wrote this the month before she passed, Phyllis said. She gave it to me and told me to hold it until you needed it. She paused. I should have found a way to reach you sooner. I'm sorry it took this long. I took the envelope. Outside the window, Knoxville was gray and February flat, the sky the color of old cement. I held the envelope until the room was quiet, and then I opened it. One page inside. Pale green stationery. I had forgotten she kept pale green stationery, and the sight of it brought back her desk drawer so precisely that I had to look away before I could start reading. It said, if Phyllis is giving you this, then something went wrong that I hoped wouldn't. I am not angry and I am not afraid. I am only sorry you're reading this without me sitting beside you. The trust is yours. It has always been yours. I built it the way I did because I wanted you to have something no amount of hard luck could touch. I asked Tessa to help because you were working yourself into the ground, and I couldn't bear to add one more weight. That was my judgment call. I own it. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to take it seriously. Don't protect her at the cost of yourself. You have done that your whole life. For me, for her, for everyone in your orbit. I have loved you for it. I have also watched it make you smaller than you deserve to be. You are allowed to want things for yourself. Take what's yours. Fight for it. I will be watching. All my love always, Irene. I folded the letter and held it in both hands for a long time. Outside, the city moved through its evening without knowing or caring, and somewhere across town, my daughter was hosting the Dearborns for dinner. Roscoe Dunbar's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Market Street with a plain door, no gold lettering, a waiting room with 4 chairs, and a view of the Tennessee River through a window that needed cleaning. Roscoe himself was 52, compact, and still in the manner of men who have spent careers reading rooms, and he had already pulled the county land records and the LLC registration documents before Phyllis and I arrived. He walked me through it methodically. The power of attorney Tessa had used was valid. She'd obtained it legally during my 2018 hospitalization, and it had never been revoked. What she had done with it was not. Authorizing the sale of a primary residence without the owner's knowledge or consent, using a fiduciary instrument for personal financial gain, and failing to account for the proceeds constituted fraud under Tennessee statute. The fact that the buyer was her husband's business entity made it worse. A forensic accountant Roscoe had consulted the previous evening had traced $41,000 of the sale, proceeds to a line of credit in Lance's firm's name. The land parcel was a separate matter. Because Phyllis held trustee control and the trust documents were properly maintained, Lance had no legal mechanism to acquire the parcel directly. What he had been doing, keeping me financially distressed, isolated, and waiting for an opportunity to get my signature on a consent form, was deliberate and documented. Roscoe had subpoenaed Lance's business emails through a preliminary discovery request and found a thread with his project manager from 14 months prior. The message read, in its entirety, the access issues resolves itself once the old man is out of the picture. Should be a matter of months. I read that printout twice. I was not a person in that sentence. I was a line item in a land acquisition spreadsheet. Marlene's photographs were the piece that made everything else provable. She had captured the silver SUV, the real estate sign, the woman with the key, the men with the measuring tape, all time-stamped within 2 hours of Tessa driving me away from my own driveway. Roscoe said the photographs established that the property was being marketed before I had vacated it, which meant the listing had been arranged in advance, which meant the conversation Tessa had with me in October about the contractor and the guest suite, and how much Lance was looking forward to seeing me, All of it had been a prepared script rather than a concerned daughter's impulse. Marlene sat in Roscoe's office and delivered this in complete sentences with no hesitation, and when he thanked her, she said, "I kept what I could prove," and picked up her purse. 3 days later, Roscoe filed for a temporary restraining order in Knox County Circuit Court, freezing all transactions related to the Tillman Road property and the Blue Ridge Holdings LLC. He filed a separate motion establishing Phyllis's clean trustee authority over the land parcel and blocking any transfer or encumbrance. Then he told me about the investor meeting. Lance Orman's development firm had a presentation scheduled for the following Thursday. 14 investors and 2 institutional lenders were gathering to hear Lance announce the final phase of a mixed-use project in East Knox County, a project whose entire eastern access point depended on a 3.4-acre land parcel a 67-year-old retired HVAC technician now legally and unambiguously owned. We arrived at the office tower on Gay Street at 8:45. Roscoe wore his gray suit. I wore my good flannel shirt, the one Irene had given me for our 30th anniversary, and I had thoughtfully about whether to change and decided not to. I was not going to dress up to be taken seriously. I was going to walk in as exactly what I was. The receptionist on the 9th floor was not prepared for Roscoe's introduction. He stated my name, the parcel number, my status as beneficial owner of record, and my intent to attend the investor meeting in that capacity, and he said it with the patient clarity of a man who had spent 15 years explaining legal realities to people who wished those realities applied to someone else. Lance came out himself. He was in a charcoal suit with his jaw set and his eyes doing the recalculating thing that eyes do when a plan has just encountered an obstacle it didn't model for. He looked at me, and I watched his face move through several things very quickly. He said my name like a question. "Your investors are waiting," Roscoe said pleasantly. "Shall we?" The conference room held 12 people around a glass table, laptops and renderings, and the organized materials of a meeting that believed it knew what it was about to accomplish. Tessa was standing near the door with a coffee cup, and when I walked in, she looked at me, the way people look at something they were certain was contained and have just discovered is not. The color left her face in the space of one breath. Roscoe set his briefcase on the table. He removed the restraining order and placed it at the center. He removed Marlene's photographs. He removed the email chain with Lance's project manager, the forensic accounting summary, the trust documentation establishing my ownership. He placed each one in sequence with the unhurried precision of a man who had been building toward this table for 15 years in 1 week. When he finished, the room was quiet. One of the institutional lenders picked up the restraining order and read it. A second investor leaned toward a third and began speaking in a low voice. Lance was standing at the head of the table with both hands flat on the surface, and his project manager whispering something to him, and Lance not responding. I put my hand on the trust document, Irene's name, my name, the parcel identification number. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said. "I'm here because my wife left me something and I intend to keep it." What followed was not dramatic in the way movie scenes are dramatic. Lance's lenders suspended their commitments within 48 hours, pending resolution of the legal claims. His primary investor issued a formal withdrawal notice by the end of the week. The project, without access to the Tillman Road corridor, had no viable permit path and no viable financing path, and both of those things became true in the same 7 days. Tessa called me on a Sunday morning, a call, not a text, which told me something about the state she was in. I let it go to voicemail. She left 3 minutes of something I couldn't fully listen to, pieces of apology wrapped around pieces of justification, wrapped around something that was not quite either one. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I called Roscoe and told him to proceed. Lance filed for divorce 2 weeks after the investor meeting. The fraud charges Roscoe had submitted to the Knox County DA's office were still working through their process. "These things take time," he told me, and that was the truth, but the house had already been returned to my possession by court order, the Blue Ridge Holdings transfer voided as fraudulent, the Tillman Road deed re-recorded under my name. I drove to the house on a Wednesday afternoon in April. The porch looked the same. The key still had the small nick on its bow from the time I dropped it in the driveway in 2009. Some things persist through everything. The house smelled like closed windows and the particular quiet of a place that has been waiting. I walked through each room slowly. The back door still swelled in its frame in cold weather and needed a shoulder to open. I put my shoulder to it and it opened, and I stood on the back step and looked at the herb garden. The rosemary had survived. It had gone leggy and overgrown, branches crossed in the way of things left to their own devices too long, but the root structure was intact, and the smell when I broke a sprig between my fingers was exactly what it had always been. Irene had planted it 30 years ago and never once had to tell it to come back. In the bedroom closet, on the top shelf behind a box of tax records, I found a small cedar box I recognized as Irene's father's. Inside, under a folded cloth, was an envelope, my name on the front, same handwriting. The everyday pen, not the good one, which told me this had been written not in a formal moment of reckoning, but in some ordinary afternoon, and kept. I sat on the edge of the bed in the late April light and opened it. One line: when the rosemary comes back, you'll know the worst is over. I held the note for a long time. Outside, the afternoon sun was moving through the yard the way it moved every April, low and golden, catching the back fence and spreading across the herb bed and making even the overgrown rosemary look intentional, like something planned rather than survived. I called Phyllis that evening. She answered on the second ring, and the silence on the line was the silence of a woman who had been carrying something for 6 years and was ready to set it down. We talked for 40 minutes. She had known Irene since Irene was 7 years old, and she had things to tell me. Small things, ordinary things, the kind that don't fit anywhere in the formal business of grieving, but that I had been missing without knowing what to call the missing. I told her I was going to establish a fund through the trust to provide legal assistance to older adults navigating financial exploitation, people who didn't have a Phyllis walking into their hospital room, who didn't have a Roscoe, who were signing things they didn't understand in rental apartments in the middle of the night because the arithmetic of their lives had stopped adding up and no one had thought to explain why. I wanted to call it the Irene Caldwell Fund. Phyllis was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would tell you that's exactly right. I believed her. The next morning I woke at 5 without an alarm. Old reflex. The bedroom ceiling was lighter than I'd remembered in months. The room faced east, and April mornings came in differently than February ones. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the HVAC unit cycle and the particular quiet of a house that is yours, that has your name on its deed and your wife's rosemary in its yard and your history in its walls. I got up, made coffee in the kitchen where she used to make coffee, stood at the back window, and watched the rosemary move slightly in the morning wind. Then I went outside, found her pruning shears in the shed where she always kept them, cut the rosemary back to where it wanted to be, setting the trimmed stems on the back step because the smell of them was a thing worth keeping. I worked until my hands were green with it, and the morning came up around me, slow and clean and entirely mine.